It's member-supported Hawaii Public Radio, all things considered, and I'm Dave Lawrence. Thanks for joining us. Fun artist who's in town this week at the Blue Note. He's playing through Sunday. Got a chance to hang with him, and Exit 105, new EP that he's got out, Long Way From Home, new record that's due in 2017. Peter Cincotti is his name, and he's joining us now. How you doing, Peter?
Good. How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing good. Nice East Coast guy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're East Coast too, right?
Yep. He's two East Coast guys. No waiting.
What are we doing in Hawaii?
That's a good. Well, you're playing, and I'm working. So
I don't want to go back.
You don't want to go. Is this your first time?
First time, and it's completely seductive. I don't want to leave.
I can't blame you. When it has that effect on a lot of folks, and one of the things that makes you a really unusual cat is this piano at the age of 3. Now, a lot of folks that I have the privilege of getting to talk with have a similar kind of story, but 3 is really early. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess like folks or somebody saw something happening and then just guided you further. Explain the story.
That's about it, right? I mean, when I was 3, I mean, that was before I even remember things, but my grandmother bought me a toy piano, like a 10-key kind of box, and for some reason I was drawn to it. I just never stopped playing it, and I think my mother in particular, my parents noticed, but my mother in particular noticed that I was drawn to this and started just, lightly encouraging it. And the key word is light, because I never had parents that like pushed me to practice. So she, started taking lessons at 4, and by 5 they got a little piano in the house. So it was like something that it was whenever I wanted. It was always associated with fun. And it's just something that I kept doing. Like I said, I never had practice hours. I could play whatever I wanted. And that was the beginning of that. So that's the key, I think, to everything. You got to have fun doing it.
That's a good point, and kudos to Mom for doing that. That's definitely a good thing. Now, and forgive me if some of this stuff is wrong, but I was reading a little bit about you, and it occurred that in some of the reading I saw that you played at the White House. Is that something true as a teenager?
That was a random opportunity that came my way when I was about 13, and I remember playing at the White House when Bill Clinton was in office, and I was hoping he would, take his saxophone and join me, but it wasn't. I remember seeing him get on a helicopter and go to I think it was he went to the Army Navy football game or something. I was crushed.
And what were you doing there? What was you?
I was playing. It was just an event they had for the military, I believe, and I was playing just piano. Solo piano was one of those first gigs. That was kind of how it went. Anytime there was a gig or an opportunity, I would take it. And I grew up in New York, where there was tons of moments like that, and a lot of my teachers played at clubs. So I started playing clubs when I was 13.
Who were some of the, and that leads right into where I was curious, to do something like that at a young age, obviously, in addition to Mom, there were other people who were playing a mentor role or who were having a critical influence in the development of your career. As you look back on it, who would be some of those folks, or maybe certain experiences along the way that really cemented things working out for you to do this as a profession? So
there were so many. Just so many. I was lucky in that sense. I had, again, a lot of the teachers in New York, the piano players that I studied with. I remember I went to a Harry Connick show. I met him when I was 7 years old. He would call me up on stage. Very generous musicians that kind of continued through my early teens that would that's how I learned. I studied, but I had live opportunities that were you get up there and you do it, and you make mistakes and you try and keep up with musicians that are better than you. And I think I attribute a lot of that to being in New York. If I was somewhere else,
you wouldn't have had those chances.
I wouldn't have had that quite that way. So yeah,
that's a huge cat to have an interaction with. And also on the same sort of hugeness note, debut record, Phil Ramone. How does that end up happening? And this is a guy who had produced all kinds of cats. So I gotta believe maybe he was telling you some fun stories along the way. Were there any stories that stick out too?
I was always curious about Billy Joel in the studio or anyone, Michael Jackson, Elton John. I got spoiled really quickly with amazing producers, and Phil was, at the top of that list. So yeah, he heard me in a club. Again, I was playing in New York. By that time I was about 18, and he was in the audience and wanted to record a record. And working with him was great because I just basically did what I did. It wasn't like we made what I did live come to life in the studio. And he was a great producer in that sense. Very different from David Foster, who I met 2 records later, another, 16-time Grammy winner. It was amazing. I mean, I really got lucky in that sense. But I made a very different kind of record. I made a very pop record, and working with David was an amazing experience as well in a very different way. So I really learned a lot through these guys.
And not capturing you live so much with David, more of a produced thing where you where there's a little bit more of a layering process with the song. Yeah,
it was. Well, the music was different. So like, when I wrote with Phil, when I worked with Phil, a lot of that was kind of jazz stuff. And I was, when I worked with David, I was a writer by then. I was like a songwriter. I shifted, and David was one of the first people to support me as kind of like a pop songwriter. And that changed a lot because a lot of fans knew me as a jazz artist. And when I met David, I started changing audiences, and people started to get this hybrid of music that I wanted to create. And on this current album that we'll talk about, that's to me the epitome of my goal, is to blend genres and not really be in one category and bring the piano to the center of modern music. But David was a significant stepping stone on that third album.
How would you describe this new record in terms of its sound and its progression as it relates to departing maybe from things that you've done or exploring areas that you've wanted to get to?
I think in a way it's a return. Like, I think the departures were probably the farthest departure was my 4th album, my last record. And there, it was more of just making these songs come to life. I mean, some of it even veered into like art rock territory, whereas me just making a concept album. It was called Metropolis, which I'm really proud of. But on this record, I wanted to bring back the piano, but I had just something in mind sonically, and I ended up producing this record. So it was the first record I produced. So I took, everything I learned from these guys, and the production ended up affecting the songwriting, and I brought the piano back. And so there's like crazy jazz solos over a modern beat, which I never really did before. It was either kind of songwriter, pop, or jazz. And this record, I really think, blends it in a way that I haven't yet done before.
So I was thinking of, as I watched you, just got a chance to see Peter doing his thing out there. And so Billy Joel obviously comes to mind in terms of what does this remind you of when you're watching it, if I was to try to describe you to somebody else. But another cat, and I guess it might have been that Philadelphia Jam. Maybe it was one before that. Forgive me for not knowing which song it was, but the one that made me think of Noel Gallagher from Oasis. Not Liam, but Noel. When Noel sings sometimes, it was just like, it sounded just... And then the song was not such a stretch either.
Oh, fun. I never heard that one before. I've heard a lot of different comparisons, but not that. That's cool.
Yeah, that's what... And on the note of the rock and stuff that you dig, who are the artists that have shaped you? And it doesn't always have to be rock, but in terms of like key rock or pop cats that you look at as both an influence and maybe people who are still surviving and you're listening today?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, everyone from the classic people, like you said, Billy Joel or Paul Simon, or like the early rockers, like as far as what they did lyrically, and their, I admire so much of that kind of discriminating.
What's early rock? Are you thinking Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry?
No, I mean, but that was also a bit like Jerry Lee Lewis in the 50s was huge to me. But in the 70s, I'm talking about more 70s. And then like today, I think this record kind of blends groups like more pop, like One Republic style production in with traditional songwriting. Like if you were to put Billy Joel, One Republic, and let's say Oscar Peterson in a blender, that's kind of what I was shooting for with this album.
I'm impressed. Well, you have some very diverse taste. No wonder that you've made such an impression on people. Before we go to wrap it up, it would be wrong to not mention some of these cats that I know you've got. Sting, Annie Lennox, you've jammed with both of them, and if did I read this right? Ray Charles.
I opened for Ray Charles right before he passed away, and it was a huge honor. We were in Canada, and it was a huge theater, and I had like a split bill with him, and it was an amazing night. I remember I went backstage and I met him, and I was asking him about monitors because at that time I was, I didn't really know how I wanted to perform, and he had no monitors on stage, and he had 20 guys, big band, everyone's playing loud, drum.
Was it earpieces?
No, nothing. So if I can ask, how do you what's going on? I mean, and they're so everyone's so tight. I go, how do you hear? And he's like, all he said to me was something about he doesn't like monitors, and then he said, "So I like to hear what the people hear," was what he said, which I ended up putting, it took me forever, and I still can't make sense of that statement because it's not what the people hear. You're on stage, but for him, it was like I like to hear that sense of the
natural sound.
Yeah, that natural sound. And for the rest of that particular tour, I took all the monitors away, and I tried, and then I realized I ain't Ray Charles.
So that was that's one gig that you did.
Give me the monitors back. I can't hear shit.
Just one gig with him.
Just one gig. Yeah.
What city?
I think where was it? It was in Canada. I think it was Toronto.
That's a nice place. Wasn't it Pantages, was it?
Possibly. I don't remember. I don't remember the venue.
It's a great theater.
Place, big theater though.
That was a great one. I saw on Halloween night, 1999. I went there to see the final night of the Phantom of the Opera. After 10 years of doing it, they had Paul Stanley of Kiss as the Phantom for a 3-month run, and he was the final, or for a number of months actually. It might have even been longer than that. He was the final guy doing it, and that was the final night of it. It was Halloween.
Oh wow!
So whenever I hear Toronto, I have to relay my Toronto story. You a Kiss fan?
Sure, in some way.
New Yorkers like you?
Yeah, exactly.
It's Peter Cincotti. Look for Long Way From Home. It's coming out in 2017, and he's obviously at the Blue Note through Sunday, and a real pleasure to get to spend a little time with you. Wishing you a lot of luck, and hoping we get to see you back here again.
I hope so, too. Thanks. Thank you.